Alright, this is what we'll be making, a radial menu where you can right click, you can hover above your little options like so, you can go ahead and select them, you can see in the console coming out which option we've selected. You can also increase this size all the way up to 6, so let's look at 4. You can see 4 icons split perfectly, and we can click through all 4 like so. Let's try out 5. See, 5 evenly split icons, we can select all the different options. And let's try out 6. 6 icons, all split evenly, and we can select each different icon like so. Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our small section prefab. This is how it's made. We've got a picture of a whole circle at the bottom, and we've used masking to cut it all the way down to the segment that we want. So let's go ahead and turn off the mask so that we can see all of our different things. So at the very bottom we've got a picture of a giant circle, a full circle, and then one layer up with this image, we use the UI mask as the source image of the image component, and we chuck the mask on, it'll cut it down to a quarter circle like so. Then we go ahead and go one level up to our final whole object, and this one will mask and rotate the quarter circle underneath to get the small segment that we want at the exact angle. So as you can see, we'll turn the masking back on, we get only that segment, and then we can go ahead and rotate this segment to go ahead and complete our full 90-degree segment, or go all the way down to whatever level of degrees we want. Cool. Let's go ahead and look at the large section now. This one is similar to the small section prefab, just with a 180-degree circle instead of a 90-degree circle. So again, we have our whole circle at the bottom with masking on top to get the effect that we want. So let's go ahead and turn the masks off. Cool, so we have a whole circle at the very bottom. One level up we mask it in order to get a 180-degree circle, and then we mask on top of that to get the small segment that we want. And then with our 180-degree circle, semicircle, we can go ahead and rotate that around to get the desired segment that we want, like so. Cool, so now we go ahead and collect all of our segments up and we make our radial menu like so, and we can display different icons on top. Let's get into the code. Alright, let's make a section class. We won't be needing the start or update method, so let's get rid of them. Let's import Unity Engine UI. We're going to need to control the position and rotation of some UI elements to get our circle segments the way we want. We're going to need to control the segment objects themselves, also the full circle objects, and the option icon objects. We will also need to control the circle image itself so we can highlight it or do whatever we want. Same with the option icon image. Let's make 2 separate functions to control small segments and large segments, as the math for these is separate. Let's start with the small segment function. We're going to need some input here. Firstly, the total number of segments in the circle, which segment we are, if we can click. We won't be using this in the demo, but just showing how you would pass this type of info through the setup. We also need the sprite for the option. Firstly, we need to calculate the size or the angle of our segment. This is just a full circle split up into our number of segments. Before we do anything fancy, we need to make sure our segment resets its state to avoid interference between function calls if you were to open and close the radial menu. So let's set the circle object's rotation to 0. Same with the option icon. Same with the section itself. Cool, now let's actually set the rotation up. We first need to rotate the internal circle so we show only the part we want. We started with a 0 rotation, but we need to rotate this by how much of the circle we want to show, which is our segment angle. Now the icon image object. We start at 0 and we need to rotate this by the segment's angle as well. But we need to keep rotating depending on which segment we are. Further along segments need a bit more rotation. So we just rotate by the index. Now let's set the section object rotation itself. We start with the 0 rotation. We need to rotate this also by the segment angle. But we want to rotate backwards so that our segments are ordered clockwise. And again, keep rotating if we are further segments. Cool, let's jump to our large segment setup. Again, we need some input, the total number of segments, which segment we are, if we can be clicked, and our icon sprite. We start off the exact same as the small segment by calculating our angle and resetting our state. Now this larger setup will only be used when we want 2 or 3 segments. We need to rotate our circle object to achieve this. For 2 segments, we need a 180-degree segment, which means we do not do any rotation. And for 3 segments, we need a 120-degree segment, which means we rotate backwards 60 degrees from 180 degrees. Since these segments differ a lot, we need to move our icon image around so that it's centered properly. You can do cool math to figure this position out, or do what I did and just muck around with the UI till it looks good and copy over the position. This is what I got. Now we need to rotate the option icon just like our small segment setup, and rotate the section object itself just like our small segment setup. Let's also create a function for the setup details. This guy will set up the color of the segment and its icon, so we need to know if it's clickable and what sprite to use. If it's clickable, let's set the color to gray. Otherwise, we will set it to white. Again, this isn't used in this demo, I'm just showing you how you would set up a functionality like this. And let's set our sprite. Back in our small segment setup, let's use this. And back in our large segment setup, let's use this. In our section class variables, let's also keep track of which segment we are. In our small segment setup, let's record this. And in our large segment setup, let's record this. Now we can't use Unity UI buttons because UI buttons are rectangles and we want our buttons to be parts of circles and only clickable in the circle part and nowhere else. So we're going to set up weird shaped button functionality ourselves. This sounds very scary, but I promise it's very simple. Let's start off by using Unity event systems. We're going to update our section class to use the event systems interface. We need clicking events, moving the mouse onto our button events, moving the mouse out of our button events, and finally moving the mouse around inside the button because we only want to use the button in a very specific shape. Let's start off with the pointer enter event. We need to decide if we've entered straight onto the visible part of the circle segment or if we're just within the object bounds, but not on the visible part. We will use the rectangle contain screen point function. We give it our section object, rect transform, the event position, and the camera we're on. This lets us know we're within the bounds of the whole section object setup, but we need to decide if we're on the visible part, so we need to do another check. Give it our circle object now, the event position and camera, and let's make our segment green so we can visually see if we're on the button. Now let's handle moving the mouse around within the button itself with our on pointer move. This function gets called every frame the mouse is within our object. Let's do the exact same check. and set it to green just like before. But if we fail to be on the visible part of the circle, we want it to be grey so we can visually see the button deselect. And if we're just completely moved out of the bounds, let's set it to grey as well. Next, we also need to explicitly handle the event of moving completely outside the bounds with our on point to exit. And let's just set it to grey here as well. Now we need to handle clicking our radial menu button with our on point to click. We'll do the exact same check again to make sure we're able to click the button only when we're selecting the visible circle segment. And let's leave this as it is for now, and we'll come back to this later to plug in our click function. We're going to need a new class to manage all of our separate sections. Let's call this radial menu. We don't need a start or update method for now, but we will use update later. We're going to use Unity UI again. We need a list of sections, a separate list for our small sections, and a separate list for our large sections. We also need a list of our sprites, which for this demo will be hard-coded, but when plugging this into your project, you should make another class to handle populating this info. We need to know how many options to show, which again, we will hard code, but you should populate this with a handler. Let's also just keep track of if we're showing the menu or not. We're going to need two functions, one to show the menu and one to hide it. Let's focus on the show menu function first. First, let's just handle the breaking situation where we are trying to show more options than we can handle. Let's just throw an exception here so we know we've set something up wrong or populated the info wrong. Cool, if we're showing 4 or more segments, then that means each segment will be 90 degrees or less. And for 2 or 3 segments, we have larger segments. Let's loop over how many we want to show, and we'll use the small segment setup we have. Let's turn the small segment on, and set it up with our small segment setup function, giving it the number of segments we want to show, which one it is, if it's clickable, and what sprite to use. And the exact same thing for the large segments, except we're using the large sections list and the large segment setup function. Cool, let's set up our hide function now. We'll loop over the small sections list and make everything disappear. And the same for the large sections list. Let's bring our update function back. We're going to need to show the menu to the user. We call our show menu function and keep track of showing it, but we only want to do this when the user asks, for example if they right click, and only if we're not already showing it. And let's set up a way to hide the menu, maybe with the escape key. Let's also just make a select option function, which our segments can call when the user clicks on them. For this demo, we're just debugging if we've clicked it. In an actual project, you would make an option handler class of some sort and plug it in, and carry over is clickable info if you need it. Back in our section class in the variables, let's keep a reference to our controller. And in our onPointer click function, let's use the function we just made.
Cool, let's plug everything back together. So in the small section prefab, inside of our section script, let's look at the section object. This should be set to our parent level object. The circle object, this is our inside image that we rotate in order to get our segment working. The option icon object, we've just set to the option icon, this thing, which we'll put the sprite into. This circle image is just the image at the very bottom, which is the image of the whole circle that we've masked over. So we can color this the color that we want for highlighting and deselecting. And the option icon, the actual image part of it, so that we can change the sprite. And the radial menu controller, we won't set in the prefab itself, but we set outside in our scene. Cool, let's look at the large section. Again, in the section script, we've set our section object to the parent level object, the circle object to the semicircle we have underneath that we rotate, the option icon object to our option icon, circle image to the full circle image at the very bottom, and the option icon image to the actual option icon image. So you can set the sprite. And again, we don't set the radial menu controller because we set that outside in our scene. Now make sure back in our prefabs, the option icon image, we do set that back to white. I just set it to a different color so that we can visually see that for the demo. But let's go ahead and set them back to white so that our radial menu functions as we want. Cool, back in our scene, we have our 6 sections for the small sections, and then 3 sections for the large sections. This is just the way I've set it up. You can muck around with the sizes that you want, although I wouldn't recommend going over 6. Let's look at the radial menu. The radial menu script is here. We've gone ahead and set our small sections list 6 long, and we've put all of our small sections in there. And same with the large sections, 3 long, and all of our large sections in there. Cool, and in the options, we've just hard-coded 6 different sprites to show. And the num to show here we can change to control how many we want to show. Cool, now in each individual section we've also updated that radial menu controller to our radial menu reference. That's on every single section. Cool, let's go ahead and hit play. Let's right click, we can see our menu, and we can in the console see the different selections working. For the different options, we can change the number that we show. Let's change it to 5. There we go, we've got 5 icons evenly spread out, and we can select each option. Cool. Cool, if you have any questions plugging this into your project, leave a comment below. See ya.